Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Hugh Hewitt live inside the Beltway on this December 12th in the year of our Lord 2024. Morning glory and evening grace to everyone out there. I am so glad to be talking to you this morning because I do not believe a lot of the American media understands what Israel has done in the last 48 hours. It's what we didn't do when Team Biden bolted Afghanistan. We left behind billions in high-end weaponry, billions in tanks and armored vehicles, gazillion rounds of ammunition, left it all there for the black market and for terrorists around the world. Assad falls on Saturday, and by Sunday, rebels are consolidating their various slices of Syria. And we don't know who's going to turn out to be a Salafist, jihadist, crazy, who's going to be turned out to be a Turkish proxy, a Kurdish proxy, proxy of the Gulf Arab state. There's going to be a civil war in Syria for a long, long time. And it may end up being a bunch of statelets. It's a failed state right now. But Assad is gone. His jails are open. But he had a gazillion weapons. He had stockpiles of chemical weapons because, of course, the Obama deal that was allegedly going to remove all the chemical weapons from Syria didn't happen. He made more after that deal, after the red line was crossed and Obama did nothing. All Syria did was build more and more and more weapons of mass destruction. And over the last 48 hours, the Israeli Air Force and the Israeli Navy have destroyed 80 to 90% of everything that the Syrian army, the Assad army, had. And I'm going to read to you from Emmanuel Fabian story in the Times of Israel, but I encourage you to just think about what they accomplished. All the world owes Israel a thank you. Like running around Europe after the fall of the Soviet Union, collecting loose nukes was one of the great achievements of the George H.W. Bush administration. What Israel does and has been doing in the aftermath of the fall of Assad is one of the great things I've seen done. From the story. Following a major 48-hour bombing campaign in Syria, the Israeli Defense Forces on Tuesday said it had destroyed most of Bashar al-Assad's regime's strategic military capabilities in an effort to prevent advanced weaponry from falling into the hands of hostile elements. In a statement, the IDF said that its Air Force and Navy had carried out over 350 strikes against strategic targets in Syria since the fall of the Assad regime over the weekend, taking out, quote, most of the strategic weapons stockpile in Syria. The military estimated it had eliminated 70 to 80% of the former Assad regime's strategic military capabilities. The operation was dubbed Bashan Arrow within the military, after the biblical name for the Golan Heights and the southern Syria region. The IDF released footage from the campaign, which it said targeted 320 sites across Syria. The strikes began late Saturday afternoon, first taking out Syrian air defenses to give the Israeli Air Force more freedom. Wave after wave of airstrikes carried after, this sounds like the Marianas Turkey shoot. For those of you who are World War II history fans, that was when, in the Battle of the Philippine Seas, the American jet fighter force destroyed the Japanese opposition. Wave after wave of airstrikes carried out by IAF fighter jets and drones hit the Syrian air bases, weapon depots, and weapon production sites in Damascus, Homs, Tartus, Latakia, and Palmyra, according to the military. The military said the airstrikes destroyed many long-range projectiles, Scud missiles, cruise missiles, coast-to-sea missiles, air defense missiles, fighter jets, helicopters, radars, tanks, hangars, and more. The IAF also targeted several chemical weapons sites in Syria during the first wave of strike. Meanwhile, on Monday night, Israeli Navy destroyed 15 Navy vessels belonging to the former regime at the Minat El Baida Bay and Latakia port on the Syrian coast. The Assad regime was an ally of the Iranian regime, part of the so-called Axis of Resistance, and it's been basically a Autobahn for weapons from Iran to Hezbollah, and that's over. We have no intention of interfering in the internal affairs of Syria, said Benjamin Netanyahu yesterday, but we certainly do intend to do what is necessary to ensure our security. Hence, he said the IAF was bombing, quote, military strategic capabilities left by the Syrian army of the ousted Assad regime so they won't fall into the hands of jihadists, close quote. More quote. We want correct relations with the new regime in Syria. But if this regime allows Iran to reestablish itself in Syria or allow the transfer of Iranian weapons or any other weapons to Hezbollah or attacks us, we will respond forcefully and exact a heavy price from it. What happened to the previous regime will also happen to this regime. Then Israel's defense minister issued a warning to some of Syria's rebels who are considered to be Salafists, saying that any entity that poses a threat to Israel will be targeted relentlessly. Quote, the IDF has acted in the last few days to attack and destroy strategic capabilities that threaten the state of Israel. He said a tour of the Haifa naval base, during which he was briefed on the Navy strikes on the Assad regime's now sunken Navy. Katz reiterated that the IDF is creating a demilitarized area in order to sterile defensive zone in southern Syria near the border without a permanent Israeli presence, but not allowing anyone to move within it. It's an extraordinary bombing campaign, and I have not seen any headlines on it anywhere. That's because we got a lot going on here. Donald Trump keeps pumping out nominations for his second term. The Speaker of the House sat down with Bret Baier last night. John Thune's coming here this morning. They're getting ready to get the first budget done. I heard the Speaker say yesterday the budget will be done in January before President-elect Trump takes office again, and they can move out. Meanwhile, who's most upset? Always look for who's most upset with what the Israelis did, and then you can judge whether or not what they did is a good thing. Iran is upset. They are blaming the fall of Assad on U.S. and Israel. It's a great hallmark of a totalitarian government whenever they do things that are absolutely, positively, 100% fable. And everybody knows it. It's a great mark of a terrible regime. When they step up and say, oh, Assad, we hardly knew ye. But the butcher is gone. He's in Russia somewhere. And we've got Iran complaining. We got a lot of show coming up for you today. And I just want to focus your attention. I'll talk with Matt Continetti on this. This is such an important strategic development. The destruction of an arsenal of weapons of mass destruction. The destruction of the hardware and advanced weaponry of a totalitarian regime. The stories are heartbreaking, actually, as the free people of Syria, at least in the chaos of the flight of Assad and the dissolution. Because, of course, when a regime falls like this, nobody but nobody who worked for it wants to be anywhere near anything associated with the regime or they get strung up. There's a lot of violence going on in Syria, a lot of vigilante justice being meted out right now to former members of the Syrian army. That's what, it's a 13-year civil war. There's no way around the violence that is coming now as payback. And there's going to be a lot of payback that has got nothing to do with Assad. But the one thing the world doesn't need are for chemical weapons that Assad had, that he used on his own people, to get into the open black market of the international arms dealing. And I'll talk with Matt Continetti about it. It's an extraordinary display of military prowess by Israel. And the irony is that the massacre and the slaughter, the awful events of 10/7, are looking more and more like the awful events of Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, where the Imperial Japanese Navy awakened the sleeping giant that was the United States. Well, the sleeping giant here is the little country of Israel with the giant-sized punch, because in the 14 months since 10/7, Israel has destroyed all of Hamas's control. There are Hamas fighters and terrorists left in the tunnels of Gaza, as there are 100 hostages alive or dead. They have destroyed Hezbollah in Lebanon, South Lebanon, thrown that country back to the free people of Lebanon to decide what to do with Hezbollah. And they have destroyed Syria's weaponry, and they have attacked Iran without consequence twice, and they've left Iran alone and naked to the world. And one wonders whether or not Joe Biden, desperate for any kind of accomplishment. Now, I'm not quite sure he's sentient, I don't think he's thinking very well. There are some very disturbing bits that leak out of the Biden White House. But whoever is running the country for the next 40 days, think about this. It is time to hit the Iranian nuclear sites as that regime reels backwards under the ferocious and sustained assault of the Israeli Defense Forces. My hat is off to them. A lot more coming up today. Don't go anywhere. I'm Hugh Hewitt.